At Professional Risk Management Services, our medical liability insurance program for psychiatrists and behavioral health group practices, the Psychiatrist Program, is designed to meet your needs throughout the various stages of your career. As a national psychiatry-specific program, a policy with PRMS can cover child and adolescent, forensic, early career, and military psychiatrists, as well as moonlighting residents and fellows, part-time practitioners, and telepsychiatrists. Learn more about how PRMS can protect you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you everyone for joining us. I'm Dr. Mikadze. I'm one of the psychiatry residents at DCDPH, St. Elizabeth's Hospital. And today I'm very excited and proud to announce this new podcast series that is an initiative of CLM Division of Washington Psychiatric Society. And our first guest, Dr. Dietrich, is with us today as the last president of WPS. And just before we get started with our interview, I just wanted to give a little brief background to this podcast and initiative and why we're doing this. So this podcast was created, as I mentioned, by a CLM division of WPS and headed by Dr. Swarty, who is the upcoming president of WPS. And the main mission for the podcast would be to help facilitate and maintain the connection between the mentors and mentees. The podcast will be constructed in a way of like interviews. That would be the psychiatry residents from different programs in DC will be interviewing psychiatrists associated with WPS. And we hope that by understanding their stories, their experiences, their challenges and wins and losses and their stories in general, we would all be able to find the long-term mentors that are so important when we're starting our careers. And so with this being said, I'd like to introduce once again our first guest, Dr. Dietrich, and thank you so much for being here with us and opening up this podcast series.
Thank you, Dr. Mikadze. I am honored to be the initial interviewee.
Just to get started with like background about yourself, what would you like us to know about you as one of the potential mentors for any of the residents who are logged in right now and listening?
I am a solo practitioner and have been for 30 plus years in the Alexandria area. I went to the University of Maryland Medical School and Georgetown University residency, where Dr. Stephen Epstein, the current chair of the department, was my CNL attending when I was a resident. So I really enjoyed seeing Dr. Epstein more recently. When I started my practice, I had no patients, so I had to moonlight at Woodburn, which was the community mental health center for Fairfax County. And while there, I used my Spanish. So I was the Spanish-speaking psychiatrist while at Woodburn. But I have maintained my private practice for the past 30 years, ever since I graduated.
And also became the president for Washington Psychiatric Society. We'll talk about it a little bit. So you mentioned, your residency program. I'm sure you also had mentors and people you aspired to become or people who inspired you. Would you share a little bit maybe about that and what the mentorship might mean to you and why it's what's useful in general, since all the podcasts would be about that theme in general.
Yes, I am happy to share about that. At Georgetown, as I'm sure the other programs as well, but when I was a resident back in the 80s and early 90s, we had to rotate through clinics, and I was assigned to the mood disorders clinic. And the psychiatrist running it at the time was Dr. David Goldstein, who has been in private practice in the DC area until just this summer. I believe he's fully retiring just this summer. Dr. Goldstein was an invaluable mentor to me. I was in the mood disorders clinic with him as a third and fourth year. And then I did actually do a little bit. I was an attending in the mood disorders clinic briefly before heading out and starting my own practice. But more importantly, while he was a wonderful mentor when I was a resident, I could not have made it in private practice probably without Dr. Goldstein, because since I was in a solo private practice, I had no way to run difficult cases by or challenging decisions by anyone. So I paid Dr. Goldstein for weekly supervision for years, for 20, 25 years. And in it, I was able to learn more about medicine, medicating, etc. But even more importantly, I was able to learn so much about psychotherapy and psychodynamics and relationships and transference and countertransference. And it was a safe place for me to discuss my feelings about patients.
Yeah, I feel like those points that you mentioned, including someone to aspire, learn from, to share your feelings about, that we all need, especially when we're starting good careers and it's all gray area for us, and it stays gray for a long time, I guess. But it's very important for everyone to have that person who can relate to you and understand you and where you're coming from. And you told us a little bit about your residency. Would you mind to tell us a little bit about why you chose psychiatry at all, and what thought process led you to go into this field specifically? I bet it was less of a popular field when you started, even though it's getting more popularity right now.
It was a less popular field, unbelievably, because it is the most interesting field. When I was growing up, my father was a pathologist at Sibley Memorial Hospital. And during my summers, during high school and college, I worked there as a phlebotomist or as a nursing aide. And I enjoyed it. It was very interesting. So I enjoyed the science of it. And my father always spoke with us about different scientific aspects of medicine. So then I went on to University of Maryland, and I enjoyed internal medicine, but decided to apply to psychiatry. And I am really glad that I did, because what I find most rewarding about psychiatry, in addition to helping people, is the stories. It's like reading every half hour that you see somebody, it's like opening another novel, and you never know what the next chapter is going to bring. You have to keep reading, and you have to keep the novels in your head as you get to know your patients.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I'm sure, despite the complexity of our field, and there are a lot of losses in the battle between these complexities, there are also a lot of rewarding factors why we keep going to try to help people who come to us for help. Why would you remember maybe a significant, rewarding story, something that really stuck in your mind. I'm sure there would have been multiple by now, but one that you can share with us.
What I have found, as I said, so interesting about our patients is their stories. And often, at least in a small private practice, the people that come in to my office have been the identified patient in their workplace, in their family, in their relationships. And by that, what I mean is that they are the ones that can't tolerate whatever dynamic is going on outside and around them. And as they come in, and over time, as we unspool the dynamics and the patterns, watching patients apply what they have learned is really rewarding. I can think of, many cases, but one in particular that I really like is a couple that has had marital problems, and it turns out that each came from homes where the pattern, the man was really relegated to being sort of the second best out of the two children, and the spouse was relegated when the father would get angry with the children or the mother, he just wouldn't speak. Mm-hmm. So my patient's husband has always been competitive, and there became a dynamic within their family mm-hmm. of husband, wife, and two children, where he worked unconsciously to make himself the good guy and her the bad guy, or the identified patient, the crazy one. Mm-hmm. And as she has understood that, it has really helped their dynamic and the family dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that I think illustrates a very important point, that by just like helping your patients, you also help the social circle around that patient as well. As our work is not just focused on like one person who comes to us, but also the people around them who are also hopefully positively influenced by treatment of the identified patient. And you mostly practice right now in your private practice, and that I'm very sure took a lot of time to build, and a lot of setbacks, a lot of challenges that had to be overcome. Would you mind to tell us a little bit about how you came to build your private practice, which is pretty successful, as I can say?
Yes, I'm fortunate in that I had support from my husband, so I was able to build it slowly, although I did work at Woodburn as the Spanish-speaking psychiatrist. And then I also worked with another psychiatrist. He had a successful practice going, and I went in, and so I picked up private patients that way until I had enough to support myself to go and then sublet an office. Mm-hmm. And when building a private practice, it really takes, well, it might not take so long nowadays, just because psychiatrists are scarce and people are more interested in psychiatric care. But back when I was building my practice in the early 90s, it did take a while. It certainly took easily 2 to 3 years to even have a good number of patients. I think probably the biggest issue when you're in a solo private practice is the isolation. And that's where my paying of Dr. Goldstein and my joining WPS have made a difference. so that I'm not so isolated. I know other people have peer groups, and the group that I graduated from residency with, we initially tried to do that, but basically we were friends and we never really supervised each other. So that wasn't very successful as a peer group, Other problems that have arisen for me are having a small practice means that I have not had an office manager. I haven't had a billing manager. I haven't had a scheduler. So I have done all of that. I answer all of my own emails and telephone messages. That takes a lot of time. I know other people in private practices, when they get to a certain level, are able to pay for secretaries or billing services.
Yeah, I definitely must take an incredible effort and willingness to still continue to build because you want to continue with that path. But I'm sure, especially back in those days without this extensive social media support, telepsychiatry, all of this that came with the developing during like 20th century was pretty challenging.
Yes. Call when you're in a solo private practice. You're always on call unless you find someone to take call for you. You're always on call.
Absolutely. That takes a lot of effort. Well, thank you for sharing that. It is definitely something to think about if you want to follow that career path and build on that specific way in your future practice. But you also mentioned, and one very important part of your career was the reason you chose to join WPS, and then you became the president of WPS. Can you tell us a little bit about that part of your life?
Yes. Dr. Swarty, our current president, will remember when Dr. Gupta put out a membership survey with Ms. Johnson's help and Ms. Clark's help. And in it, they asked why people joined. And the top two reasons people joined were for CME and for the collegiality. And when I joined, I joined, but when I became a volunteer for WPS, it was in 2017. And I volunteered to join the CME committee at the same time as Dr. Matthew Rudorf, our current CME chair. And I did that because genetics were just coming out as a tool, and I hadn't seen anything offered by WPS. And I was hoping that by joining CME, I could talk with the CME committee about getting more information out about that. And I have stayed because of the collegiality, because I think the people in WPS are just terrific.
Yeah, I've also had an opportunity to attend and meet a couple of members from WPS, and it was still a lot of experience, a lot of pleasure. So I'd really urge all of the upcoming psychiatry residents who are in DC area to attend a lot of the events that are arranged, including our podcast, hopefully. And I also know about the recent event that you did arrange, and that's a big achievement, I would say. Can you tell us a little bit about that, maybe?
Yes, we are fortunate to have on the podcast Dr. Swarty, Ms. Johnson, Dr. Dunlap, and I don't know if Dr. Sorrell is on the podcast, but Dr. Dunlap and Dr. Sorrell were instrumental in organizing the Charles Prudhomme Human Rights Award. Dr. Sorrell helped get our keynote speaker, Dr. Ramaswamy Viswanathan, the incoming, well, now current APA president. And Dr. Swarty read through the first 2 years of notes, excuse me, of after the founding of WPS, and put together a wonderful 10-minute historical overview. We were founded in 1949, and at that time, they were pulling together psychiatrists from the area in order to advance the progress of psychiatry in the area. And Dr. Swarty was able to really elucidate how the returning, excuse me, the psychiatrists returning from the war were really pushing for more biological treatments. And we had, at this event, we had 250 people attend. 60 of them were younger people in training or ECPs.
Yeah, that was a pretty significant event. And thank you for arranging that for us, as well as just to celebrate the psychiatry in our area. And I think the last of the themes that we would probably touch upon before moving to the audience, maybe for some questions, is we spoke about your future outlooks regarding psychiatry, and I think that was a very interesting view of how psychiatry will develop. So maybe you can share a little bit about that before we close out for today.
So as Dr. Swarty talked about at the event, the psychiatrists who founded WPS wanted to be more collaborative. And that was one of our themes at the event, which is why we had the chairs from the different psychiatry departments. I think in a greater sense, you know, psychiatry will play a very important role, and APA has already rolled a lot of this out with collaborative care, where we are leaders of teams of physicians, psychologists, social workers. We are uniquely trained in both biology and psychotherapy, and uniquely positioned to understand dynamics within organizations, within our practices. And there are not enough of us around. So one way for us to spread our expertise is by working with others and supervising, so that more people have the opportunity to get good psychiatric care. I am also looking forward to what happens with genetics. I think that's going to be really exciting as researchers further elucidate, determine genes that are playing significant roles in our patients' illnesses. Absolutely.
You made a really beautiful look back to mentorship through what you're speaking about regarding the future of psychiatry. And thank you again for participating in this interview.